The Total Screen proudly presents the Weekly Set Podcast with Tyson Gifford and William Rohrig. Episode 214, recorded July 13th, 2019. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Set, the official podcast of the Total Screen. I am your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime here at the Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So today we are going to be talking about Stranger Things Season 3, and we're going to continue our discussion of Legion, which this episode introduced a beloved character. So we're going to talk about that. But let's kick things off with Stranger Things Season 3. We talked about this a little bit before we started the podcast, and I think we're both kind of in agreement that it's significantly better than Season 2 and possibly better than Season 1.
Yeah, it is possibly better than Season 1. It is, I really enjoyed this season. I really thought it was very well done. A lot of great moments, a lot of great humor. They found the tone, like they landed the tone perfectly.
They found the budget too.
And they found their budget. I loved I love how unabashedly 80s this is. Like the villains are Russians. That is so 80s. Like to go back to Russia being like the main bad guys.
Red Panic.
Yeah, Red Panic.
They even make a few references to Red Dawn, which is cool.
Yeah, which is cool. But one of the things that made this work is it was tightly plotted. One of the things I loved the most about it was how all the different characters end up on separate paths, coming across and following separate pieces of the puzzle that end up, they end up converging in the end, like, they will, because, everything's related. Just everybody's following different parts of it.
Yeah, once it did start coming together, it felt really good, too.
Yeah, it felt really good when it started coming together, finally. Yes. It's one of those things, like I said, like, again, it's 8 episodes, so it's no wonder it was tightly plotted. There wasn't like a lull. There wasn't a point where you felt like something was there just for filler, or to waste your time. Like everything, like the plot gets going pretty much at the jump, and then you just go on this ride, and then the ride's over. It
also took a lesson from Lost, because every episode ended at like a high point.
Yes,
it makes you want to go like, oh, I got to see the next episode.
Yeah, every episode ended on some kind of cliffhanger that made me like, shit, I gotta watch the next one now.
Yeah, there were plenty of moments where I'm like, oh, we're just going to watch like 1 or 2 episodes. And then like 4 episodes later, we're like, okay, we got to stop now.
I had to struggle sometimes to stick to my 1 episode a day, because I'm also watching Veronica Mars for like next week's. And Veronica Mars, like there's like 20 episodes. So I have to watch 2 episodes of that a day to make it for next week's podcast. And so like, I'm watching.
Unfortunately for you, it's also the weakest season.
Yeah, unfortunately for me, it's also the weakest season. And I'm like, I gotta watch like 3 hours of television a day. I can't double up on Stranger Things like as much as I want to get to that next episode after the episode ends, because oh my god. So sometimes it was tough though, because the way some of the episodes ended, like they really made you want to reach over and click next episode.
Yeah, I think they also went a lot darker this season, but at the same time, it had more levity than Season 2. Like, Season 2 went darker than Season 1, but they also lost a lot of their levity at the same time. And then, like, Season 3, it kind of, like, took the best of it. So there's constantly little funny moments throughout it. That Season 2 was kind of lacking.
The whole spiel about New Coke.
Yeah. Just kind of, like, in a tense moment. There's, like, all this other shit going on.
That was, like, a tense moment, where, like, like they were in the grocery store, they were trying to escape from the Mind Flayer, and 11, her leg was injured, and they were trying to clean up the wound, and they're busy trying to do that, and then Lucas goes on this, like, monologue about fucking New Coke. And it was done perfectly.
Yeah. It's really funny, like, the way they were able to keep that in, the way they were able to keep some levity while also going darker, because Stranger Things has always been dark. I mean, the first episode begins with a child disappearing into like a horror state reminiscent of Silent Hill, and there's deaths, like even in the first season, there's a few deaths,
right. Like for all the humor and the shenanigans, and for being a show like primarily, like its main cast is primarily children. It's not like a kiddie version. This isn't like Are You Afraid of the Dark? This is like legit horror.
Yeah. And like I said, people die. Like it's a lot of people actually died in this season.
Yeah, a lot of people died.
Not only did you have like the direct deaths, like, at the season, spoilers, of course, we're talking about the whole season here, but not only do you have like Hopper, who's, still possibly alive, but also Billy, who kind of like went from being like a villain to kind of having like a big sympathetic moment to end on.
He did. I really thought like Billy got shafted because, he was an asshole and a bully last season. I admit, like, he shouldn't get a redemption arc, but like, I felt like he was an asshole this season, but he was like taken over by the Mind Flayer. So it was all like the Mind Flayer doing shit through Billy,
Yeah.
And I did like the ending though.
Oh, the build up to his hero moment. Probably the most beautiful shot in the whole season is when like 11's down and he stands up and faces the Mind Flayer. It was a beautiful shot.
It was a beautiful shot. Like his
redemption. Beautiful with the Mind Flayer being like disgusting.
Like his hero moment was one of the best moments of the season, you know, and of course, like Billy ends up getting killed in that moment.
Yes. He has like his little moment with Max too, where he's apologizing at the very end, and they don't stick on him too long, which I like, because it's like there's all sorts of chaos going on, so you just kind of very quickly get him kind of whimpering that he's sorry as he's dying, which is like a good moment. I like that. But you have those two big deaths like that. Again, like Hopper's probably not really dead.
Most of, like, I guess like the whole thing was, I was gonna say like most of the levity was with, Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Lucas' sister,
Erica.
Erica, yeah.
Can't sell America without Erica.
Yeah. And Dustin is like, that's oddly true.
Yeah, it's kind of like he has that reaction like, oh, but, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I like the realization moment of like, oh, you're a nerd. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm not a nerd.
You got My Little Pony backpack, and she's like, so? And then he goes on about all the ways My Little Pony is actually nerdy. Foreshadowing.
You're good with math. You follow politics here. Like all these things.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah, she was great. She was a great addition to the show. Like, they gave her more than like a bit role.
Yeah, she did like that bit role in season 2, and everybody loved her, and they were able to expand that out. Yeah, because that was great. Like, just like her and Dustin interacting was like perfect. I also liked her like antagonism between her and Robin when they were like working at the ice cream counter. Like, she's just going and like being like the just biggest asshole kid.
I love it when they recruit her, and she gets in there and she goes, okay, Operation Child Endangerment, and Robin is like, will you not call it that?
Robin is another like good addition to the cast.
Yeah, good addition to the cast. Yeah, she works as a foil for Steve, so last season we saw like Steve and Dustin working off each other's foils.
Their epic bromance.
Their epic romance. This time they introduced Robin, so Steve has somebody more age appropriate as a foil. and it works really great too. Like, again, the characters' chemistry and the way they interact with each other was perfect. Like, all throughout the series, like the character chemistry, like even when like Joyce, Jim, and Murray, oh my god, those three together.
Oh, and Dr. Alexei, yeah.
Dr. Alexei, like I actually got to like the dude. It was sad when
that was sad when he died, but it was sad, but it was funny at the same time with Murray like being across from him when it happened.
With Murray being across from him when it happened.
Yeah, like, there's kind of like a funny sweetness to it, and then he dies, and it's like sad, but then it's like at the same time like there is some kind of humor to it just because of Murray being in that situation. But yeah, like I loved all of that. I loved seeing Mike through Hopper's perspective.
Yes.
As being just this asshole kid macking on his daughter.
Yeah.
This punk kid macking on his daughter, and he's like, God damn, this fucking Mike guy.
Yeah. Hopper's just like, God damn this fucking, I gotta do something about this fucking Mike guy. Like, I can't deal with it. You know, like.
He's like, I could just kill him, right?
I think if I was in Hopper's position, I would have the same reaction. I'd be like, Jesus fuck, you're here way too much. You're always alone in the room with my daughter. Like, can you just fucking like back off? You know, like, yeah, I would have the same reaction.
And it's really funny because we've typically seen the show, like Mike and 11 are pretty much the main characters of the show.
Yeah.
You know, it's an ensemble cast show, but really it's Mike and 11. You know, they're kind of like the central characters, with Mike being kind of like the leader of the group and 11 being kind of like the special character, you know? But the way they were able to make Mike being from like the lead that like everybody wants to follow, and then you can see him in this perspective as like this is jackass kid macking on his daughter. Yeah. It's great that they're able to do that, and believably so. Like where you're not just like sympathizing with Mike in those situations, you're kind of like you're getting both sides of it. You know.
Well, also you kind of do see like Mike becoming like a jackass, and that not like intentionally, but like,
just the effects of hormones and
the effect of hormones, and the fact like this is like his relationship with 11 is his first real relationship, and also he's a freaking kid, so he gets like super protective and possessive of 11.
I like the way they played with that too, though, because they played with that really realistically. They played with it in a way that kind of like diminished Mike a bit, all the way up into the point where they're like, oh, you're like holding 11 back. You think 11's yours and everything. And then he has that moment where he kind of breaks when 11's like not there to notice it. But we find out later that she did. But where he's like, I don't want to lose her again. Like, you know, and you get that moment where it's like, oh yeah, he lost her at the end of season 1.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did lose her at the end of season 1.
He like lost her, thought she was dead, wasn't sure, like he was holding out hope for it. And so for him, that was a traumatic moment because he loved her all the way from season 1. And it's just, the relationship's just bloomed and blossomed more so since then. And so he's terrified at the prospect of losing her. And it gives context to all of his possessiveness, you know?
I liked that there was that schism between, Mike, Lucas, and Will, because, you know, Mike and Lucas, have relationships now, and they're more worried about their relationships with women than, you know, playing Dungeons and Dragons or doing like they're maturing, and Will is kind of not. And so
it's interesting because they're still playing on what they did in the first season with Will, which is this kind of like vague hint at like homosexuality. They did that in season 1, but it's not like, I like the way they're doing it because at no point have they hinted directly from Will's perspective that he might be gay. It's all been like other people's perspective of him. Like it was his father being an asshole and thinking that he's like effeminate, so he's like gay or something, you know?
Right.
And then in this, they had that moment where Mike, when they were arguing, and Mike said, it's not my problem you don't like girls.
Right.
And like, and there's this kind of like quick short moment or something of reaction where it doesn't even matter if Will is gay or not. He's getting the negative effects that gay people have suffered. Well, just because of who he is, even if he's not gay or not, you know?
It's just that, you know, he's not interested, and he's more interested in, you know, doing, Dungeons and Dragons and, you know, hanging with his friends like he normally does, and they're interested in other things. And that creates a schism, you know?
I like the way they're playing the idea of perception of a character as being kind of gay-ish. Without necessarily ever getting that from the character itself.
Right.
Like at no point does Will lead off in that direction. It's just other people's perception. And you can see that has a negative effect on him. And it's not the idea that, you know, he's gay so he doesn't want to be discriminated for that, or that he doesn't want to be told he's gay when he's not or something. It's like, that's completely beside the point. And I like that. I like the way they're doing that. You know, like they've been developing that through the course of these seasons, like in a very kind of subtle way. And I think that's kind of clever on their part. So, yeah, I think that works well. And it works well for the period too. Cause that was a time in which the F word was used quite frequently around playgrounds and stuff, you know?
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
That's just kind of what it was like at that time. So I like the way they're playing with that. And it just makes it all feel more real. So I dig that. Like you said, I like all the different kind of schisms between the kids, not just the thing with Will, between Mike and Lucas and then Will, but also they play with it in a different angle with Dustin being the one who has we would say the girlfriend from Canada, you know?
Yeah. So Dustin has this girlfriend he met at science camp, supposedly.
She's in Utah. I say girlfriend from Canada because that was always the joke. Somebody would say, I have a girlfriend. She just lives in Canada.
They keep bringing that up too because Dustin says like he has a girlfriend he met at science camp and she lives in Utah. And Steve and Lucas's sister like make several like jokes that she's like a made up girlfriend, you know, like Dustin's imaginary girlfriend that he made up, you know, because one of the first things he does is he sets up a radio tower he built so that he can walkie her from across the country, you know, and the first thing he does, he brings the boys out there to hear him walkie his girlfriend, and he sits there and he's not getting any response.
Yeah.
And eventually the boys are like, okay, well, we're not sitting around for this. We're just going to go do our own thing. And, you know, and so that doesn't help the perception that he's just making this up, you know? But we finally learned, like, one of the greatest moments is when we finally learn at the end of the season that she is very real and that he had...
in the midst of the Mind Flayer's attack in the mall and the kids like in danger and the people in different locations, we have him and his girlfriend singing
the Never Ending Story theme song.
Yeah.
Like
great.
She insists he does it or she won't help him. Like like I didn't know like at first where it was. Hey, I thought she wanted him to say like he loved her, which is what I thought he was agonizing about, but no.
That's really funny. And that they later played on that too with Max and Lucas like making fun of him.
Max and Lucas at the end like making fun of him singing that song.
I also like the relationship they developed between dividing up, making 11 and Max like friends and like having them separate from the boys a bit and having like Mike and Lucas be like the boyfriends to those two girls. And Lucas is like trying to be like, oh, you know, I've been in a relationship for longer. I mean, technically you met 11 first, but I've been, you know, it's been a longer.
Lucas is basically acting like he's the relationship expert.
Yeah. He's like, when you get in a fight, you gotta like, you know, you gotta buy a gift. Going through the mall trying to find a gift, and Mike's got like $2 or something. So that was really funny. And then, like developing 11 and Max's kind of friendship was interesting too. So kind of making 11 more into like a real person rather than just like a robot who talks very slowly.
Right. Yeah. Like 11 really like fully came into her own as like, as more of an actual like a kid now, you know, like I felt like compared to season 1, 11, like she has like a lot more personality now. Yeah, she is not like this confused like robotic like type person who is just coming out into the real world and not knowing what anything is. She's starting to act more like a normal teenager in this season.
You know what might be one of my favorite parts in season 3 is the part where Will is trying to explain the feeling he has when he knows the Mind Flayer is near or something. And he's like, you know that feeling when you're on a roller coaster and it dips and everything goes into your stomach? And all the kids are like, yes. And 11's like, no.
No. Yeah, 11's like, no. Because she's never been
that like made me laugh in like the same way of like in the first Avengers movie with all the stuff with Captain America not getting the references.
Yes.
And how like once they made like some reference to Wizard of Oz, he's like, I got that reference.
Yes. Yeah, I got that reference.
Yeah, so that was really funny. I dug all the moments of kind of levity between the kids and stuff. And we got here by talking about how this is darker, though. And
there's a lot of body horror.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of Cronenberg type stuff. I think it's more, I think that this season is more inspired by The Thing, which they directly reference in Lucas' thing.
Which isn't Cronenberg, but if you're going to talk about body horror, you pretty much talk about Cronenberg anyways.
Yeah, you pretty much talk about Cronenberg because we have people like getting possessed by the Mind Flayer and then they melt into like this disgusting.
Well, first they're like eating fertilizer and shit.
Yeah. First they're eating like fertilizer and like chemicals, like chemicals they could get their hands on.
Yeah.
And then finally when it's time, like they melt into puddles and then merge into like the Mind Flayer.
And there were a few kind of it's explicit and gross when it happens. The giant Mind Flayer is just melted humans in this form. It's really gross. But on top of that level of grossness, there's like really dark things they did, but they did it like in a more subtle way, which I appreciate too. Like there's a moment when the Mind Flayer is basically calling in all of its possessed people. And you see oh, there's a husband walking away from his family and they're like, John, where are you going? John, where are you going? And he's just leaving off and you're like, oh, all these people are dead. They've ingested all these chemicals and stuff. So even if the Mind Flayer went away, their systems are destroyed. They're dead.
They're dead. They're already gone. They're not coming back.
But then you see in that scene, you see like a kid walking away too. And that's like really creepy in that moment,
It drives it home that, I like that they did that because they drove home that these are people, So that was really important to do. And yeah, you're right. These people are gone. There wasn't they weren't going to defeat the Mind Flayer and save everybody from their mind control.
Yeah, you can't just ingest all that chemicals and fertilizer and be okay. You're dead, your body's, doesn't recover from that. So there were a few moments where the characters were talking about this means that if we do this, it'll be killing them. But they kind of quickly write it off. And it's like, I'm glad they did because you don't want to put out the message that oh, these people could be saved. No, they're dead. They're all dead.
Yeah, they're all gone.
Yeah, they're already destroyed. This is just a matter of them, how long they're going to last before they're destroyed.
It wasn't the same as the possession of Will,
Yeah, it didn't go quite as crazy as Will wasn't ingesting a bunch of chemicals and fertilizer.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, that was really dark. The Mind Flayer was really dark. As I'd mentioned, they kind of found their budget in this season. Season 1 was already decent. Season 2, they did not even talking about story quality or anything, but they, the lighting on that show, was phenomenal, and they started doing bigger set pieces and stuff that looked really cool. This season though, man, there's Game of Thrones level stuff. The giant Mind Flayer is a Game of Thrones dragon level special effect.
Yes. I'm glad that they didn't do any side stories this season. There was no 11 going off and having adventures with people who aren't going to be relevant to anything afterwards.
I was I was like, when are they going to bring in those other characters from there? So I didn't think they were going to do a side story, but I thought they might get roped into coming to Hawkins or something. But I'm kind of glad in the end that they didn't.
Right, because it wouldn't have made sense anyway. And it would have just been to force the story with those characters. Those characters were clearly only important insofar as trying to explain Eleven's backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's I think with all the Russia stuff they added in this season, that would have just been too much if they added that in too. So I'm glad they kind of put more of the focus on the whole Russia thing, which was very entertaining.
Like I said, so I'm glad there wasn't there wasn't a B plot line that had nothing to do with anything. I'm glad everything everybody was doing was attached to the main storyline because it made it so when all the characters converged, it was natural because of the path they were on. Will and the boys were trying to find the Mind Flayer, trying to beat the Mind Flayer. And
I like that they were able to bring in characters for specific purposes and then not dwell on them. A lot of shows make the mistake of taking these kind of B side characters that serve a purpose and trying to give them too much of their own story. We talked about Jessica Jones with Hogarth. That was a perfect example of that. Where it's we could have had a few moments with Hogarth. We didn't need this whole storyline for her.
No, she didn't need that whole storyline. That had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, it's and I'm glad they were able to find ways around that here. Like they just didn't fall into that trap. Like a perfect example would be like Mr. Clark. So they have the science teacher. They have a moment where Joyce needs some information and they need a Mr. Clark moment, and they have maximum fun with it by having him working on some craft in his garage, playing My Lasagna, a Weird Al cover.
Yeah, of course.
And then you have the moment, you get this information out. You also get, after the moment, you get a little bit with Hopper being jealous by the fact that she visited him, and he's all angry about her standing him up, and all of that. But then that's it. It's just dropped. Like you don't need it. You don't need to create some other storyline for him.
Right. That's the only time that character appears, because that character is not needed for the rest of the story. That's the only time that character is needed. That's what you call tight plotting. We don't need to know about what's going on with him and his life, because it's not important to anything that's going on.
Exactly. So what did you think, speaking of side story kind of stuff, what did you think of all like the attention put onto Billy before he was possessed, and somewhat after, of the old woman thirsting after him?
Oh God. I was like, yeah, all right. And then
it's funny because it was kind of a gender flipped Fast Times at Ridgemont High reference.
Kinda.
Like with the girl getting out of the swimming pool and the guy like thirsting after her and stuff.
I've seen this in other things where, like, you know, a bunch of lonely bored housewives were thirsting over some hunky dude, you know, like that's been in like a lot of stuff, you know, so.
But I love that they did that, and he's still a fucking asshole.
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
He's coming out and they're all like lusting after him, and the first thing he does is see like some kid kind of scuttling along and yells at him that he's gonna ban him from the pool permanently to like exert his dominance. He's still an over some poor kid.
Because you know what? That's Billy. That's his. That's his personality. That's who he is, an asshole. Or that's who he was. Rip Billy. Rip Billy, 1985.
Hey, let's talk about some of the guest roles in this. So there are a few kind of somewhat significant guest roles.
Oh, where did the significant? Carrie Ells was the mayor. I know that's like.
Oh God, it's such a scumbag in this.
Yeah, see, it's such the scumbag mayor. Oh my, who is working with the Russians, you know, like, way to sell out your country, you piece of shit.
Yeah, he's a traitorous funk. Even when he's being like interrogated and beaten up by Hopper, he's just an asshole every step of the way.
Every step of the way, he's just an asshole. Then there's the Russian hitman who's basically like the Terminator. He's literally it's literally modeled after the Terminator. I mean, come on.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff with him that's like, very Terminator based. Even in that scene where the mayor's getting beaten up, he's like, "Who is he?" or something, and he's like, "He's Arnold Schwarzenegger."
Yeah.
So they even like reference it directly like that. But then the other big guest role, I think, is Jake Busey.
Jake Busey,
who is just like
who is
scumbag maximum.
The son of major 80s actor Gary Busey. Jake's
got his own IMDb page. You know, he's got his own roles to take credit for. He's great in The Frighteners, the Starship Troopers, you know, stuff like that. So,
but those aren't 80s movies.
No, 90s movies. Yeah.
Anyway, Jake Busey by himself would not be an 80s reference.
No.
But yeah, he is the biggest misogynistic prick asshole.
Oh, he just brings the sleaze, and in like an intimidating way too. Like the hospital scene where it's Nancy and Jonathan facing off against him and who's the other guy?
He's the other guy's the editor of the
Ted.
Paper.
Yeah, the editor of the paper, Ted.
Yeah,
so it's Ted and Bruce.
At that point, they're like fully possessed by the Mind Flayer. So he was an asshole before he was possessed by a Mind Flayer, but
with the Mind Flayer, he's like dangerous and scary, and also that fucking asshole.
Yes. That whole scene in the hospital is one of like the most tense moments in the entire season.
Yeah, and it basically ends with a real direct reference to the Thing with like the two bodies merging into one, you know?
Oh my God, like that scene, like that's what I love about this too, because it can bring like the tension, like the real like suspense, like that whole hospital scene was like nerve-wracking.
Yeah, there were a few like that. There was that and the sauna scene.
Yes.
That was like, you think they have it in the bag, and then it's like, no, they were ingesting all those chemicals for a reason. Yeah. And then you see like the way that it's able to use the chemicals, the Mind Flayer in its body body form, like the way it's able to kind of use them because they're no longer human, as they said,
Right.
And yeah, like Billy just being able to like force his way out, even with like 11 trying to control the situation, and she's not able to.
Yeah, she's not.
It's a great response to, you have this OP character in 11. It's like, well, how do you go against that? Well, the Mind Flayer's OP too,
Well, yeah. The Mind Flayer's OP too, and we learned that the Mind Flayer didn't forget what happened at the end of season 2. Who sealed it off. It was 11.
Yeah.
So Mind Flayer's strategy is, number 1, get rid of 11. Number 2, end the rest of the world, because she's the thing standing in its way.
Mm-hmm.
The Mind Flayer knows, like, she can put up a fight, but nobody else can.
It's interesting also because this is like the first chance. We didn't, even though the Mind Flayer was like the main villain of season 2, we didn't really meet the Mind Flayer. Like, and we kind of meet him in this, season, like through Billy. Basically, Billy possessed is basically the Mind Flayer, whereas Will possessed was like an agent of the Mind Flayer.
Yeah, it's different because, Will was an agent of the Mind Flayer. This is like the Mind Flayer. Like the Mind Flayer.
Speaking directly to 11 and stuff, yeah.
The Mind Flayer is done fucking around at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else we really need to cover on this. It was really good. All the relationships were really believable. I love what they did with all of the characters we already love. I loved all the guest roles that came in. I love how dark it got, and I love that it kept its levity even though it got so dark.
Yes.
That's, I think, the main point, and it's just so, like you said, it's so tightly paced. It's not like, season 2 kind of had some issues with that, especially with that one episode, but even if you take that episode out, there's still some pacing issues with season 2.
Yeah, season 2 had some pacing issues. This one didn't. It seemed like they had 8 episodes and they used the 8 hours they had to almost maximum efficiency.
You know what it is? It's an argument for like the multi-years between seasons.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it really comes down to. Because I remember when after they had put out season 2, I saw like an interview with the Duffer Brothers, and they were talking about, like how a lot of shows now are taking more time off, and that allows for more quality control and to really get things tight and precise. And so they were talking about that. And at that point, we were starting to learn that season 3 was going to be a ways off. Like it wasn't going to be like the next year, like season 2 had been. And it was like, oh, okay, so are they really going to nail, like they're talking the talk now, that by having more time, they're going to be able to make something tighter and sharper and better, and they delivered. So This is like a real strong argument in favor of that. Whereas, ironically, this year, even though we didn't have as much problem with it as a lot of the internet did, people would basically say the opposite about, like, say, Game of Thrones. Whereas, like I waited so long for season 8, and it was the worst season ever, full comic book guy.
The worst season ever. Well, you know what? Game of Thrones had pacing problems. Sorry.
Yeah. But it's like, that's the thing. It's like, you look at what the reaction to that and the way that basically attributed to like, oh, so people, they want all this extra time to make a season, but like, what do they really give us? They don't really give us anything better for that. And people were saying kind of similar things around, when Westworld did that for its second season. Mm-hmm. Because people had issues with that as well. And so they were like going into like, oh, so you take 2 years, you act like you need that time to make a tighter story, and then you give us something that isn't as tight as season 1.
Right.
And then this comes along and it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can see how that works then.
Yeah, it's super tight. I can't think of a single moment that felt like it dragged or was out of place, or or where I felt like things were moving too fast, or like I couldn't follow what was happening, or where like there were just sudden unnatural like changes in attitudes from characters or something to move the plot along. Everything felt natural. Everything felt right. Everything felt like it had a place. It's just great. Like there was no point where I felt bored or annoyed by what was going on. And I can't say that about a lot of shows these days, like, cause, like Jessica Jones, like just last week we were doing Jessica Jones, and I was a hell of a lot of bored and annoyed throughout most of that season.
Yeah. There's lots of points where you're like, this is flawed. Like, even if you still enjoy the show, it's like, there's clear flaw here.
Yeah, there's clear flaw. here.
Season 3 of Stranger Things just kind of nailed it.
Yes.
You watched the post-credit scene, right?
Yeah, with the Demogorgon in Russia.
Yeah, like a weirdly pale.
Weirdly pale, which makes me think because they were originally trying to open up the rift in Russia, and then that wouldn't work, and I think it's because the scientist there, Alexei, kind of devised that a portal had already been opened in Hawkins, and kind of suggested that for it to work, they had to do it there, which is why
we know Demogorgons can kind of more easily traverse between the real world and the upside down.
It makes me think the ending makes me think that after the Russians were defeated in Hawkins, they just continued the experiments in Russia.
Yeah, it could very well be.
Until they got a result, which is the Demogorgons.
There's also a pretty heavy hint that some people are upset about, but I think is perfectly fine, that Hopper is still alive. And when they have the moment when they grab that prisoner.
Yeah, because they said not, because he walks past it and he says not the American.
Yeah. And so you think, well, how would an American come into Russian custody? And I think what a lot of people think seems to have happened, people that have theorized it, is that 11 at the end of Stranger Things season 1, when everything went off, Hopper basically got sucked into the upside down. And that Russia kept experimenting with their shit and trying to get the portal through, and that somehow that they were able to pull out both Hopper and the Demogorgon. So that's what a lot of people seem to think, but it's still vague. We don't really know. It might not be Hopper at all,
Right.
It seems to be, though. That's kind of the way they hinted at it, narratively, that seems to be who else would it be, a completely new character, or who else would it be that we haven't seen, in a while? Could be somebody else, who knows? Could be another one of those psychic kids. Maybe that's how they were able to get a Demogorgon into the world. Maybe they had another numbered kid, like 11. Who knows? But yeah, that was the little kind of tease for Stranger Things 4. I liked it still. I think it's the perfect amount of vague, where you just you don't really have a full idea of what it is. So right. It's kind of a fun tease to go ooh, makes you start to think about it.
I mean, I am kind of on they're going to bring Hopper back train, because the general rule is if you don't see a body.
Yeah.
Then it's not a confirmed death. It's not a confirmed kill if there's no body. And there was
the bodies were wiped out. You saw the other scientists, they were dissolved basicly. Right.
Yeah,
but we didn't see him get dissolved.
Right, exactly. They didn't see it. He just disappears. And
yeah. So that makes sense why they think he was dead, even though there's no body, because you saw the other people get dissolved. But the fact that we didn't see him get dissolved means that there's
there's still a chance. You telling me there's still a chance? I love that. Of course, at the end, Will's mom moves Will and his brother, and now 11, who she newly adopted because of Hopper's tragic disappearance. So they're moving away.
That's an interesting dynamic shift. I like that.
Yes.
I like that they're moving away, because we know that doesn't mean that means they're not going to be in the next season. No, it's that's just going to change the dynamic between the characters in an interesting way when we re-meet them. Because it's going to be that they haven't seen each other that much. They already talked about that they're going to see each other again at Christmas or something, and that they'd see each other again. So Mike very much intends to see 11 as much as possible.
Yeah, Mike very much intends on living up to that promise, even if nobody else intends on making good. Mike intends on making good.
Yeah. So we know that there's going to be some interaction. It's not like we're going to come into the next season and they haven't seen each other at all in all this time or something. That's not going to be the case. But distance is going to add new dynamics to the storyline. There's probably going to be new characters and stuff that we might meet from. Maybe it won't take place in Hawkins. Maybe it'll take place in where Will lives. Or some are completely different for all we know. It could take place in Russia.
Yeah, they could all go to Russia. I don't see a storyline where everybody goes to Russia. It's not like Russia's a popular vacation spot.
Stranger Things Far From Home.
Especially in the 80s.
Yeah.
But
Hey, but there were some movies like that. I'm trying to remember. There was a movie, an 80s movie where they went to Russia, and Russia had this fake American town where they were training spies or something. I'm trying to remember.
Spies Like Us.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I think it is.
So there's an 80s movie reference to be farmed on, you know.
I think if Hopper is the American prisoner in that Russian prison, like then part of season 4 can take place in Russia with Hopper escaping. So there you go. There's that.
It's also interesting though because they kind of answered a problem, which is if Hopper's still alive, then surely at some point Eleven's going to, in her grief, try to visit him even if she's told he's dead.
Oh yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But they answered that because Eleven's powers are kind of off right now.
Yeah. So at the end of which actually it made the climax more exciting because we get the climax where where the Mind Flayer finally catches up to 11. And she is powerless. Like literally, she does not have access to her psychic powers. She used them too much and she drained whatever psychic battery that she had going on.
Or whatever wound imparted on her.
Maybe what the Mind Flayer did to her took her powers, which I didn't even consider that.
Yeah. And not completely. Like there's still some, because even after the Mind Flayer did that, even after she was struggling to use her psychic power, she was still able to kind of go into Billy's mind.
She was.
In that one moment. So she still has some semblance of ability. It's just.
Yeah, the end of the season with like her not really being able to do, she's trying to get a teddy bear off the top shelf to pack and she can't do it and she tries to move it with her mind and it's not going anywhere. You know,
and it ends up being Mike using his superpower to get it. And the fact that actor has gotten so damn tall.
And Mike using his freakish height. So we're going into season 4 with like pretty much a depowered 11, you know. Will she get her powers back?
Surely.
Will it right away though, before shit hits the fan? Probably not. You know, there's probably going to be a moment where shit is happening and 11's not going to get her powers. She's probably going to end up getting her powers back mid-season next season.
Stronger than ever. Like she'll be like struggling trying to get them back, and then once she uncovers the secret to re-unlocking her powers, she'll be stronger than they've ever been. That's kind of like the narrative. That's the narrative structure, right? You give power, you take it away, you make them earn it back, but when they get it back, it's stronger than ever. So that's kind of the path for 11. But yeah, Stranger Things season 3, great.
Yes.
It might be my favorite season of 2019 so far.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a strong candidate for the best of list at the end of the year. Because I really enjoyed it. You know, for once, I enjoyed something. I was like, I was missing this feeling.
Yeah, it's great.
I this feeling, yes.
It's that bittersweet moment when you finish it and you're like, oh.
And you're like, oh, that's it, I guess.
No, I need something else. Hey, but there's more coming up, so we'll get to that later. But let's move on to our other show discussion, which is Legion. We're going to be talking about season 3, episode 3, also called chapter 22. I don't think there's a lot to talk about in this episode, so we might go through it kind of quickly, because a lot of it's just kind of surrealist imagery and shit, you know?
Yeah, it is, but I guess the big deal with this episode is we finally get to meet Legion's version of Charles Xavier.
Did you notice who was playing him?
I know who was playing him, but I, for the life of me, can't remember the actor's name.
It's Viserys Targaryen from Game of Thrones.
Oh shit!
It's a Daenerys' brother.
That did not click for me. Oh shit! That is so funny. So he's Charles Xavier now.
Yeah, so that was cool. And did you also notice who his who his mom was? Who David's mom was?
Yes, she was from Mr. Robot.
Yeah, Joanna Wellick. But yeah, those are some cool ones. But basically this episode is David's trying to go back as far back as possible to like when he was basically born to protect himself from Amal Farouk and all the shit that he does to his mind.
Yeah, basically, David reasons out that the source of all of his problems is when Amal Farouk lodged himself in his mind, and so David goes right to the source and tries to prevent that, of course. But there's a problem with it, which I assume that means that Carrie got his time machine thing working, that he was working on at the end of the last episode.
Well, yeah, she was able to take David through the time thing, and so that alone tells us that Nintendo Switch is way more powerful.
Yeah.
Maybe even like PS4 power at this point.
Yeah, she's able to take, but because they went back so far in time, they can't directly influence events.
They're
they
like
have,
ghosts almost or something.
yeah, they have no physical presence in this timeline, in this time period. Because I guess this is really stretching the limits of Switch's power.
So David's just basically tormenting his mom. So his mom thinks she's being haunted.
She thinks he's being haunted because, she's hearing voices. She's hearing David's voice, although she doesn't know who David is outside of a baby. So she doesn't know. And all David's attempts to influence the timeline are for naught because, his messages are going ignored. He can't really influence events in any real way.
He finally starts to manifest enough power where he can communicate more specifically with Charles Xavier. But Xavier immediately basically just banishes him.
Yes.
Away without realizing who he is,
Without realizing who he is. Because he banishes him away thinking that he is an evil presence, you know? Yeah.
And in doing so, basically, as the episode ends, we're not done with our discussion, we'll continue, but as the episode ends, Amal Farouk is basically in David, holding David within his mind, going, oh, my beautiful little boy, and it's oh, well, this is where it starts with him all tormenting with
Amal Farouk tormenting David.
Yeah.
Here it all starts. And there's not much going on in this episode. A lot of it is surreal. There's not a lot of dialogue, it's, we basically through David's time travel adventure learn how his parents met, which is in a mental institution, which David finds ironic.
One thing this episode does do that's kind of interesting though, is it pretty much cements the show as taking place in the 70s or somewhere around that era, maybe even the 60s. Because it's always had this kind of weird timeless quality that leaned towards the 70s, 60s kind of.
That vaguely resembled the 70s, although
but they seem to be saying here that Charles Xavier was in World War II.
Yeah. He was in World War II. Yeah, they seem to say that he was in World War II, and that this looks like it's the 1950s when David is a baby, and that gels. If David is in his 20s in the 70s, then that pretty much that checks.
Yeah. It's still vague. It's still not absolute. We're still not given absolute reason or anything, but it's much clearer than it's ever been.
Right, exactly.
We also get through this thing, we kind of learn about, like you said, the development of the relationship between David's father, Charles Xavier, and his mother, Gabrielle. And so that's somewhat interesting, I mean, they're in an asylum. She's kind of catatonic. She's just kind of staring off into nowhere.
Also with the timeline, that's interesting because if Charles had David in the 50s, that means he establishes the X-Men in the 60s, and that's when the X-Men comics came out. So think about it. That's really cool. I see what you did there, Noah Hawley.
That's also how you match it up so that you can keep stuff for instance, Magneto having been in a concentration camp and things like that, Yeah,
that's
as far away from that as we are now, time-wise, you can still keep that element of that kind of stuff in play.
Yeah.
By doing that.
Yeah.
Which is something that, when they bring the X-Men to the MCU is going to be probably not going to be kept.
Right, yeah.
They're going to have to, come up with a change for that.
Yeah, they're going to have to come up with change, but it looks like that's, So the timeline-wise, it looks like that's the timeline they're going with.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting watching the relation to develop. Gabrielle is, she's kind of catatonic. Xavier is able to kind of break her out of that as he's still early in knowing his powers.
Right. Yeah. He's still, this is a pre-X-Men Xavier. He doesn't have a superhero team.
He hasn't developed his super ability to be bald.
Yeah. He hasn't developed his super ability to be bald. He's not a cripple. He's still getting used to his abilities. And again, his abilities have landed him in this institution, apparently.
Yes. As you said, ironically, because it matches up to David, not only in that he was in a mental institution, or David was in his whole life, so it's a little different there, but, that he, met the love of his life in one.
Right.
So,
The only thing that's not answered is why they ultimately, gave David up, adopted him out.
Yeah, we haven't learned that yet.
And we have like these scenes where like David is looking at these events and David is like kind of asking his mother, although she can't hear him, he's asking him, why would you give me up? Why would you give me away?
That's still coming. Maybe the next episode.
Right. Yeah, maybe next episode.
We did get to see though Xavier starting to become obsessed with Amal Farouk.
Yes.
Like he's somehow linked to him. He keeps having, as he's trying to explore his powers, the more he's trying to explore his powers, the more he's like seeing visions of Amal Farouk.
It's interesting because like when he's in the mental institution and he's meeting his future wife for the first time, he tells her that, he doesn't know if there's anybody else like him, and then he gets And then I don't know what order this happens in, but eventually he gets notice of Amal Farouk, and he makes Cerebro, or the first version of Cerebro, to find people like him. And I guess like he finds Amal Farouk, and this is the first, and he becomes obsessed with Amal Farouk because this is the first person that's like him that he's come across. This is literally, Amal Farouk is probably the first mutant he discovers.
Yeah. But he's not, he quickly becomes disgusted and horrified.
Well, he finds out that Amal Farouk is evil, that he is a bad person. And so he's horrified at what he discovered, that there is this evil person with all this power.
It's pretty well acted by Harry Lloyd, who plays Charles Xavier, where he's just showing this like utter just kind of horror and disgust on his face as he's like, and we're not even necessarily seeing the things that are so evil that are affecting Xavier. What we're seeing is just kind of like just general images of him. And it's implied that Xavier's seeing and hearing and experiencing way more than that, than what we're seeing. And you get that all in just his facial expressions and stuff.
And we're seeing Amal Farouk as we see him in the present, because we learned last season, I think it was, that Amal Farouk is actually ancient. Mm-hmm. He's been around a long ass time.
Yep, and he's a monster, as Xavier discovers. Yes. And then that becomes like this point of conflict where Gabrielle, she's pregnant, she gives birth to David, she wants Xavier around, but he's always gone because he's hunting Amal Farouk. He's like trying to find him. He's like, there's constantly like, why aren't you here? And he'll be like calling, and he'll say, I almost found him. I'm almost there. I almost found him. At the same time, Amal Farouk is finding him, because we know at the end he's taken over David's body. Yeah. Which I believe it's been already explained in the series that happened after Charles defeated him.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, the series already established that happens after Charles has his big battle with Farouk and banishes Farouk from his physical body.
So this apparently happens like while he's gone for this long stretch of time. Yeah. But before he comes back and banishes future David away. Yeah. Like that would be after he'd already defeated Amal Farouk.
Yeah, that would be after he already defeated Amal Farouk. So,
and by that point he's just much more powerful, and that's probably part of why he's able to really see David now.
Right, exactly.
Where he wasn't before, because he's much more powerful.
Yeah, he's much more powerful outside of his body, which is something Xavier didn't account for,
Oh, no. I mean that, Xavier is able to see David.
Oh.
Like David from the future. And I think that part of that's because, David had been trying to reach him so many times. And it's, I think, a combination of the fact that he's very anxious at that moment because everything's going down at that moment. So he's like really stressed out, and that's amplifying David's power because his powers go kind of haywire when he's stressed.
Yes.
But then on top of that, Xavier himself is much more powerful now that he's defeated Farouk.
Yeah.
Like he's become more powerful in order to do that. He's become more powerful. And the combination of that has allowed Charles to see David, but he acted so quickly in defense of Gabrielle that he never realized he was banishing his own future son, who was only trying to protect himself.
So he knocks David and Switch out of the timeline, and David ends up back into the hallway of time, I guess you would call it.
And then Switch is like, he's trying to get Switch to take him back,
and her power is drained because
she pulls a tooth out.
Yeah, she pulls a tooth out because like he pushed her to the limits of her abilities to do that.
Yeah, and now he's just
in the end he accomplished nothing. That was all for naught.
And she's just definitely diminished. I mean, you could even call her a Switch Light.
Sure.
I had to find a way to fit that in.
You had to fit that in somewhere. Good. That was good. That was a good one. And yeah, so that's that episode. Like I said, there wasn't really much to talk about, so that's everything that happened.
Yeah, it's kind of like lots of surreal imagery, lots of like, it kind of has like, it almost tells like a haunted story from the 50s or something. Like, you know, like
it was
a
nice
British manor house haunted 50s mansion story thing.
Yeah, it was like that. It was nice because ever since the show started, people were wondering if we were going to see Xavier, if he was going to have a role in the show, and there it is.
See, now we have to just see Xavier as he is today, or like in the 70s, I guess, like as played by Patrick Stewart, since Patrick Stewart already agreed to be on the show, right?
I don't remember that.
There's a clip on, what was it? I think it was the Graham Norton show where David Haller, or Dan Stevens, who plays David Haller, and, Patrick Stewart were both on at the same time. And they were talking about, Patrick Stewart being in Logan and how that's and they were saying, so this is the end for your character. You're not going to be in any other movies. And he said, well, you know, I was talked to, and he had mentioned, I think something, it might have been like Deadpool or something, that he might show up for something like that, like in a very small role, you know, like maybe even just like a cameo kind of thing, like the way the X-Men showed up in Deadpool 2, and just like a tiny cameo. And then right after he said that, Dan Stevens said, or you could, you know, play my dad in Legion or something. And he, like, the whole audience was like, oh, I didn't think of that, you know? And Patrick Stewart was like, ooh, that's a good idea, or something like that, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe we'll get a payoff to that. I doubt it though. We haven't heard anything about it. So.
No, that's just idle chat on a talk show. It's like when Jimmy Kimmel had to cast the Avengers on, Jimmy Kimmel, and then he brought, Clark Gregg on via video, and Clark Gregg said, oh, you guys can appear on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then they kind of like...
Everyone got quiet.
I think Chris Evans like jokingly, like mockingly laughed. And been like,
everyone got all quiet. That was kind of one of those sad moments where you realize like, oh, you know, it really isn't connected.
Yeah.
But yeah, how badass of a cameo would that be if they did that? Like, I'm not talking like a role, like even with dialogue or something, but just like a real quick cameo.
That would be
like, how badass would that be? Like towards the end of the show.
That'd be badass. But it'd also just be like fan service. So I don't know how I'd feel. But yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's Legion for this week. So we're going to talk about more Legion next week. Also next week, we're going to be talking about Veronica Mars. Veronica Mars will not be back then. So that if you guys are like, oh, wait, season 4 is not going to be starting by then. It won't. We're going to be talking about season 4 in 2 weeks is when we start talking about the season 4 episodes. But Will here had not seen season 3 or the movie yet. So he's been catching up. And we thought, hey, all we have is Legion for next week. Are we going to try to like cram some other show in there, cram some other topic in there? Well, why don't we just talk about Veronica Mars? It's been off TV for so long now.
Since 2007, right?
Yeah, I think so. Because it had 3 seasons, and it was one of those mythical 2004 shows, like Lost, where like that had a bunch of like good network shows came out that year. If we're going to have the show that's coming back after so long, why don't we just do a little catch up? So we figure by then Will should be either done with season 3 or close to done with season 3. So we should be able to have a good conversation about season 3, about the movie, about just the series in general, and catch up. So I'm not going to rewatch the whole series or even season 3, but I'm going to go through and watch some of the key episodes of the whole series.
Because I never watched season 3. Now it has been 10 years, over 10 years, 9 years now. It's been 9 years since I watched any Veronica Mars. So it's interesting. Continuing this show after 9 years.
It is, as we said. I mean, we'll talk about this more next week, but season 3 is the worst season of the show.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reason for that. Like I could disclose some of that now and talk about why season 3 is worse and stuff, not just from my opinion, but just kind of a more objective stance on why it's worse, because there is a reason. But why say that now? We'll save that for next week, because it'll be part of the interesting conversation.
Like, I binged the first 2 seasons. The only reason I didn't watch season 3 is because I didn't have a DVD set of season 3. I mean, I did not have Netflix in the summer of 2008.
Yeah.
So
it was a different time, man.
was a different time. That was not a thing. I think they were still only doing DVDs.
That was when catching up meant piracy.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. As I said, we're going to talk about Legion again, and we're going to be talking about Veronica Mars, not the new episodes because they won't be out yet, but just talking, kind of wrap up of what's happened so far and what we're looking forward to for season 4, that kind of stuff. But until then, here's what's coming up in the week ahead. We're recording this on Saturday, on July 13th, but on Friday, July 12th, 3 Below Tales of Arcadia returned to Netflix. This is part of the Tales of Arcadia franchise, so it's Guillermo del Toro's CG animated show. Basically, you've seen Troll Hunters. 3 Below is like in that same universe, or same town, you could say. It's in the exact same town. Has some of the characters cross over and stuff. Also, Bonus Family came to Netflix, and One Spring at Night came to Netflix. This Sunday, July 14th, Grantchester returns to PBS, and Sweet Bitter returns to Starz. On Tuesday, July 16th, this is an interesting one. I don't know if you've heard of this. Frankenstein's Monster Frankenstein.
What?
Comes to Netflix. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay, this is David Harbour's in this, who's in Stranger Things.
I think I heard I think I read something about David Harbour doing a Frankenstein thing.
This is one of their specials where they did the Michael Bolton Valentine special. It was like a comedy thing, and it had Andy Samberg playing like Kenny G and stuff as like rival. Okay. And they did this whole comedy special. And then later they did like a Christmas special with Bill Murray. They've done a few other things. They did some charity thing that Seth Rogen did where he did something similar. So this is in the lines of that. It's like a special. It's a comedy thing. He's playing like this. I don't know exactly what he's playing, but it's like this weird metafiction comedy thing. And David Harbour's in it.
Oh, okay.
And it's called Frankenstein's Monster Frankenstein. So look out for that. You know, it's just like a little one-off short thing. It's not a series or anything. Also on that day, Human Discoveries comes to Facebook Watch. They're expanding their original content. They had that one show, Sorry for Your Loss, that like was getting them a lot of buzz on Facebook Watch. And now they're like starting to expand outward with a lot more shows. So Human Discoveries is the first side. We've talked about this, like Silicon Valley's in the content game now, you know? Apple's got a bunch of stuff coming. Facebook Watch just had a few things, but they have a bunch more coming like this year. And Pandora comes to CW, which is like a new science fiction series. So this seems to be kind of maybe in the line of like the 100, where it's more like a summer series for them. So that'll be interesting. Then on Wednesday, July 17th, Suits returns to USA, and also the new spin-off series to Suits titled Pearson comes to USA. So if you're a fan of Suits, you have double the Suits. Because you have Suits and Pearson.
Yay.
And then, yay. And then on Friday, July 19th, Killjoys returns to Sci-Fi for its final season. Saint Seiya Knights of the Zodiac comes to Netflix, a new anime adaptation. Typewriter comes to Netflix, and Money Heist returns to Netflix. So again, it's Friday, so it's Netflix night. That's it for what's coming up. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Voxel Hero. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotalscreen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast through any major podcast client like iTunes or Pocket Cast. It's hosted on SoundCloud, so you can look there as well. We only put up like the 2 or 3 most recent episodes, though. They have limitations on how much you can store there. So if you want to watch the backlog of our podcast, you want to go back. This is episode 214. You want to go back to like the first episode or any of the other episodes and watch something specific. Maybe you want to watch some of our Twin Peaks coverage and other things we've done like that. You can go and check all that back through our YouTube channel, which also has some other video content you can check out as well. So that's it. Thank you everybody for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very